Alright, so now we've had a look at the interface, I'm going to have a bit more of a look at variables, behaviours and actions. Okay, so we've got our 4 different types of variables. We have events. Events are triggered from Mod Studio, so when death is triggered, it might trigger a series of behaviours. This is going to actually sit here and trigger and then complain. There we go. Oh yeah, and all their effects displayed when our event was triggered. We have states. As these states change, they'll trigger behaviours or animations, depending on how a motion tree is set up. Basically, these are all just used to control effects and animation. Variables can be used to this is not attached. I'll fix that in a second. Can be used to specifically control something. So in this case, 75mm horizontal is related to the blank that form. Related to the turret turning horizontally. For any weapons or anything you've got turning, you need to make sure that positive is either to the right or up, depending on which axis you're on, and negative is left or down, depending on which axis you're on. This is simply because of how Company of Hero calculates. Fair few of these will be referenced within Mod Studio. I'll cover that in a minute as to where they are found and how they are referenced. But yeah, events are triggered, states can be changed. You can assign all these states yourself, and as well as the default states. Variables, you have a default, a min, a max, and wrap simply means when it hits the max, does it go back to the minimum. So for a turret rotating, it'll be wrapped, because that means it can go past its maximum and begin on its minimum again. Custom attributes. Balls are true or false, so it's either yes or no. I'll just change here. Look, integers have no decimal places. Basically, can they handle negatives? Yes, good. And when that catches up and stops, so I get for clicking so much. Yeah, there's no decimal places of integers. If you want decimal places, you use float values. In this case, it can handle 3 decimal places. As you can see, all your variables here are all float values. Strings, similar to that of states. Blah 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 blah. In this case, you can't assign more than one option to a string like you can with a state. So a state is a selection of strings, depending on which string is selected. It's an array of strings, if you're familiar with that amount of programming. But basically, what you could potentially do here is yeah, I got nothing. I was going to say, hey, give this string a default value, and then you could change it based on whatever, but it's easy to use states. Okay, behaviours, exactly as they sound. There are conditions to these behaviours. Anything from your events and conditions. They're basically if statements. They can have and or. So if you have basically, if you go, let's see, all your AND statements would need to be true, but only one of your OR statements would need to be true, if that makes sense. So either you have, I don't think this will have any, no. They're not used much in combination of and or. Basically, if you go if you want a particular part of the mesh to be visible between certain variety states. So if you wanted an infantry unit to have a backpack visible, but you only wanted it while that unit was in certain states. So the minute they pick up something else, that you want that backpack to just disappear. So you'd have one of the states is equal to, if you had 5 choices, you might have OR statements for 3 of them. So as long as they were in one of those 3 states, they would have the backpack, but not while they're in the other 2. If that makes sense. Yeah, they have an enter and an exit action. Because the conditions might be met, and then the conditions might become false at completely different times. In the case of firing, it'll activate instantly, and it will deactivate instantly, because it will be triggered straight into the next state. Whereas a variable like velocity, if you want smoke to start coming out at a certain speed, you'd have the enter action, the smoke to start, and then smoke will start coming out when they hit a certain speed, and then you might want a smaller whiff of smoke as they come back under that speed again. So as it comes under that speed, the enter action will stop and the exit action will happen, and that little whiff of smoke will take place of the big whiff. If that makes sense. All these team color actions, basically this is to just change the team color. So you can see here they've used ranges to set conditions. This is actually, so if it's equal to 6.5 or greater, or less than 7.5, so it's between 6.5 and 7.49, it'll change its team color to 7. Basically, you can use this little trick along with a random variable action. So you can have actually you'd use it with a mesh selector rather, but basically you can sit there and you can randomize things. So you might have a startup action. I don't know how many of these are startup actions, but you might have a startup action, which means it just activates as soon as the unit starts up, and it can constantly go if it's in effects. Otherwise it will just be played once until it's triggered again. That might go set random variable, and you set one of the variables to a random number, and then you have your behaviours set based on a variable range, and then depending on that variable range it will trigger different things. Normally you'd just set the random variable, and then in your mesh select you'd have a condition set so that it'll have like a hat visible if it's between 1 and 3 or something, or a bandana if it's between 3 and 5 or whatever. Otherwise in this case you could use it to trigger completely different actions altogether. So you can have different parts of the vehicle smoking randomly, that sort of thing if you wanted to. Okay, so actions. Actions are, well, yeah, they're actions. You can set states. There's a huge list of things you can do. These will be triggered once. When they're triggered once. As long as the behaviour is true, it'll keep getting triggered. So it's not the same action being constantly active, it's getting re-triggered as long as the behaviour is true. So in the case of firing, as long as let's have a look at 30 cal fire. Alright, so what we have here is all our effects that are triggered when the 30 cal is fired, and the way it will basically the behaviour will become true and it will enter a fire state. But because in Mod Studio you set the machine gun to fire more than once while it's in the fire state, it'll keep triggering the fire state. In this case, the actual muzzle combos and stuff will actually loop themselves, whereas things like cannons won't, because they're not set to loop. Basically, just stay active until the state changes and that behaviour becomes false, so it leaves that fire state. With these actions, a lot of them are marker based. If you look there, you can see there's self markers, there's also other markers. Sound attaches are only to markers, they don't have other markers. There's that sphere explosion I added earlier. But there's heaps of stuff you can play around with. If you want machine gun shells to come out of the side of your machine gun, you'd use effects orphan instead of attach, because what effects orphan does is it starts playing, but the effects won't keep following the marker if the marker moves. Whereas effects attach works for machine gun muzzle firing, because it needs to move with the muzzle. What else do we have? All sorts of stuff, attach and detach skeletons, and play around with physics. Physics rig, orphan, physics orphan. Just to drop your physics rigs onto the ground and stuff like that. You can change variables, you can do all sorts of things. You just play around with it heaps. I'm not sure how well the cam shake works, but there's, yeah, you can attach decals and all sorts of bits and pieces. As long as you have a marker to attach it to. Pretty sure that works off a marker. Saturation, orientation, position. So yeah, as long as you've got a marker to attach it to, you can pretty much attach a decal to a marker on the side of the tank, and that'll stay with it. And you can, you can randomize that decal, or you can customize it to some degree, and play around with whatever. Basically, important things to know with markers, with your effects, etc. We have delays. They don't always work as well as you want them to. You don't use them too often though, so it's not a huge thing. Your effects files, you may need to burn from Mod Studio. They're just under Data Art Effects. Burn them, put them in Data Generic Engine Art. They may already be there. I can't remember how I set that up. But that'll give you a huge number of, like, that's pretty much every single effects that's used in Company of Heroes. You can sit there and stuff around, whatever. If you want explosion effects, there's that. There's even the effects that cause glowing barrels and stuff like that hidden in there. I think it's under special. Overheat barrels, camouflage rings, all sorts of things. Lights, smoke grenade effects, everything literally. Heaps and heaps of choices. Position. What's that? There we go. Yeah, that's fine. That's right. Position is determines in relation to the self marker. So if it's self, it'll be on the self marker. If it's other, it'll be on the other marker, which is this thing. If it's between, it'll be yep. I'll install that after. If it's between, it'll be between self and other markers, so it'll be like in between there and the target, depending on. I can't think of too many cases where you might want it, unless you want, like a funky weapon which I don't know, creates an orb midway, like a laser effect sort of thing or something. I don't know. If you want intersect other or intersect self, I'm pretty sure it's like 3/4 of the way towards one or the other. Orientation, normally self will pretty much what you want. For effects which follow a marker which is capable of being moved up, down, left, right, whatever, it'll need to be self. And you may need to go back into max and rotate the marker so it's aiming in the correct direction. So yeah, because your markers aren't made to sit there and play around with the orientation until it's firing correctly. So as you can see, hang on, I'll come back to that actually. So our self marker is where the effect is being generated. In this case, I want hull MG, even though it's not technically a. Where's that how I had it? Underscore. Come back here. I can force it to trigger by clicking there as well. If I hit play, you'll see the effect playing. As you can see, it's already orientated properly when it's set to self, but if I change it to backwards, I can play. It refuses to work. Pain in the ass. See if you want to play for down. And now it doesn't want to work. There we go. So as you can see, it fires down. If I change it to backwards, it will fire it backwards. That won't be relative to the marker. That'll be firing backwards always. If I change it to forward, it'll always be firing forward. So if I change the self marker and got rid of that, it'll be firing forward on the ground as well. So yeah, you need to keep it, try and keep it orientated toward self. If you want it to start between the markers, you can orientate it back towards orientation. You can orientate it so it's specifically toward other or towards self. Otherwise you've got, and you can also orientate it based on the target marker. So that'll be forward for the marker, for the other marker, rather than forward for self. But basically self is where you want it. Other, in this case it's self, just because it doesn't need to go anywhere. For a tracer, it'll have a specific name, but I'll come back to that in a minute. The other marker, I don't know why it's even bothered setting anything there, but other marker is basically the other target. If you want to, I'll come back to it. So I need to explain other before I can explain other marker. Spawn off screen is it going to keep going if it's off screen? Basically, it's just to cut down the number of effects that the engine's trying to run when they're not being seen. And stop with marker. Anything that's attached to an object needs to be true. Anything that's being orphaned or whatever, it can be false, just because you want it to play out to the end of the animation. Okay, so other is actually specifically named. So we have a look here. I've got the coaxial machine gun for the Sherman opened in our weapon bag. We have effects, action, target name, and what this is this is our other. As you can see here, it's got other marked as self, but if I come down to the tracer, it'll be marked as 30 cal target. Basically what that does is it goes, okay, so we're using this weapon, what we're shooting at is designated as 30 cal target for the sake of special effects. So it says, okay, that's my 30 cal target, and then it will come back in here and it goes, okay, I need to fire a trace at my 30 cal target, where is it? And that's where it's been designated. Other marker is usually random for the case of traces. If you wanted to target a specific marker on something, for example, if you wanted to specifically have a sniper tracer always going to the face. You can change that other marker to the head bone or something like that, or one of the facial markers, and that'll always send the tracer from the end of the rifle to their face. Spawn off screen, simply because the target might be off screen, might be on the screen, but the vehicle shooting might not be. Most other effects, yeah. Stop with marker again, because it's coming directly off the object. It'll stop. It'll be stopped by the marker. It won't continue playing out. Looped effects, you really need to stop with the marker. That's pretty much. How long have we? Don't tell me how long I've been recording for. Oh. Yeah, that's a basic look at behaviours and actions and variables. Next up, I'll be looking a bit at meshes and moving up to the motion tree.